In January 1511, Queen Catherine of Aragon delivered a healthy son, Henry, Duke of Cornwall. The bells of London rang for days, bonfires lit up at night, and the court staged tournaments in the baby's honor. Unlike in our timeline, the child thrived, and by the mid-15 teens, young Henry was already the center of court life. Tutors instructed him in Latin, rhetoric, and the chivalric code, while Catherine, his mother, oversaw his moral and religious education. In 1518, at just 7 years old, he was formally invested as the Prince of Wales in a splendid ceremony at Westminster. His younger sister Mary was only a toddler at the time, and she stole the show with her adorable dancing. All of this pageantry showed that the Tudor dynasty, only 30 years old, was completely secure. With the succession settled, Henry VIII had no need to press the Pope for annulments or worry about rival claimants or anything like that. Catherine remained his queen, respected both at home and abroad, and England stood firmly tied to Spain through her Habsburg bloodline. Today, my friend, we are looking at an alternate history. What would have happened if Henry VIII's young son, Henry, Duke of Cornwall, who lived for only 42 days, actually would have survived? Let's continue the alternate timeline. International politics soon reflected this new stability. In 1520, the monarchs of England and France traveled to Madrid for a grand summit, a field of cloth of gold, they said, because of the golden tents. It was hosted by Catherine's nephew, the young Emperor Charles V, put together by Henry VIII's chief minister, Cardinal Wolsey. Cardinal Wolsey would act as chief minister well into the 1540s. But back in 1520, at that field of cloth of gold in Madrid, Henry VIII, Francis I, and Charles presided over feasts and tournaments and diplomatic marriages, marking England's full embrace of the Habsburg orbit. The young Prince of Wales was a living symbol of this alliance. His childhood portraits, painted by court artists like Holbein, show a sturdy and confident boy with his father's auburn coloring and his mother's Spanish eyes. Rumors quickly spread of possible betrothals, perhaps to a French princess, perhaps to a Habsburg cousin. But the important thing was that England was no longer viewed as a weak dynasty at the risk of collapse. At home, the church remained loyal to Rome, with humanist thinkers like Thomas More and Erasmus finding a welcome audience. But the religious break that tore Germany apart never reached England. Henry VIII still bristled at papal interference, but with Catherine secure and his young son growing into a strong heir, there was no urgent reason to defy the Pope. Instead, England in the 1520s entered what many would later call its Catholic Golden Age, a period of peace and alliance and cultural flourishing. By the late 1520s, Prince Henry was a teenager, tall and athletic like his father, but with the steady temperament of his mother. He excelled in tilting at the lists, hunting, and music, but his real distinction lay in his discipline. Chroniclers noted that while King Henry VIII was mercurial, young Henry seemed more measured and devout. Diplomatic negotiations over his marriage dominated the 1530s. With the Protestant Reformation spreading in Germany and Switzerland, the Habsburgs sought to cement alliances with their Catholic cousins. So in 1533, at the age of just 22, Henry married Christina of Denmark, Duchess of Milan, a Habsburg niece raised in the Spanish Netherlands. The union was celebrated as a triumph. It tied England firmly into the Habsburg network and ensured that the Tudor heir was bound by blood to the rulers of Spain and Burgundy. The marriage proved fruitful. By the time Henry VIII would die in 1547, Henry, the future Henry IX, and Christina already had 2 children, securing the dynasty even further. When Henry took the throne as Henry IX, there was no crisis of succession. Henry was already an adult, he was 36 years old, and he was ready to rule. He inherited a wealthy and confident kingdom, continuing his father's wars against France, but with the backing of Habsburg Spain, England played a far greater role in continental politics than it ever had under Henry VIII alone. English troops fought alongside Spanish forces in Italy and the Low Countries, not against them. Domestically, Henry IX upheld the Catholic orthodoxy. Monasteries flourished, and with them, the vast network of hospitals, schools, and charitable houses continued to grow. Reformist ideas circulated quietly in London and in Oxford and Cambridge, but without any kind of royal support, they gained very little traction. The burnings and rebellions that scarred other nations were largely absent from England. The greatest divergence from our timeline came in the 1560s when the Protestant revolt broke out in the Spanish Netherlands. In reality, Elizabeth I would later funnel money and troops to aid the rebels, straining Anglo-Spanish relations and leading eventually to the Armada. But under Henry IX, the opposite occurred. England sent soldiers and ships to bolster Habsburg authority, crushing Protestant strongholds at Ghent and Antwerp. English merchants gained privileges in Bruges and Brussels, and England's economy tied itself even more closely to Catholic Europe. Henry IX's reign also meant no Elizabethan golden age because there was no Elizabeth. There was no armada to repel because England and Spain were allies, not enemies. Exploration still advanced. English ships sailed to the Americas under licenses purchased from Spain. But England never developed the independent Protestant identity that came to define it later. By the 1570s, Henry IX was seen as one of Europe's great Catholic monarchs. His children's marriages spread Tudor blood across the Habsburg dominions, ensuring the dynasty's place at the center of European politics. England's literature and theater still flourished, but under Catholic patronage. Shakespeare's plays emerged in a world where saints' festivals and religious pageantry remained fixtures of daily life. The long-term consequences were profound. Without Elizabeth I, without a Protestant England, the eventual union with Scotland under James VI never occurred. Instead, the Tudors continued their line well into the 17th century as Catholic rulers, allied with Spain and positioned at the heart of the Counter-Reformation world. Now, Henry VIII reigned into his 60s. His children and grandchildren intermarried with the Habsburg dynasties in Spain and Austria, creating what later historians called the Tudor-Habsburg century. England remained wealthy from trade, but its economy looked different. Instead of Protestant merchants driving independent ventures like the East India Company, England's overseas expansion was tethered to Spanish permission. English ships sailed the Caribbean and the Americas, but under license from Madrid, sharing profits with their allies. Piracy never blossomed into state-sanctioned industry, and names like Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh lived in obscurity. At home, monasteries remained powerful landholders, funding schools, almshouses, and hospitals. The countryside never experienced the same dislocation caused by the dissolution of the monasteries, meaning rebellions like the Pilgrimage of Grace never occurred. Peasants remained tied into the Catholic festivals, pilgrimages, and liturgical calendar that would have seemed frozen in time to later Protestants. When Henry IX died in the 1580s, his eldest son ascended smoothly, another Henry, styled Henry X. By then, England was seen not as a Protestant champion, but as one of the pillars of Catholic Europe. The seismic religious wars that ravaged the continent, the French Wars of Religion, the Dutch Revolt, the 30 Years' War, they played out differently. England never backed the Dutch rebels, so the Spanish Netherlands remained largely intact under Catholic rule. France, too, found itself pressured by a unified Catholic bloc of Spain, England, and the papacy. The 30 Years' War, from 1618 to 48, unfolded as a far more one-sided conflict. Instead of Protestant Sweden and Denmark finding aid from England, they faced a unified Catholic front. Central Europe leaned more heavily toward Habsburg dominance, and the Protestant cause was largely contained to northern Germany and Scandinavia. Perhaps the most radical divergence came from home, though. Without the Reformation, there was no Puritan movement. Parliament still wrestled with monarchs over money and privilege, but religion wasn't the dividing line. The English Civil War, that bloody conflict of Cavaliers versus Roundheads, Anglican versus Puritan, never erupted in the 1640s. Instead, England continued under Catholic Tudors, gradually centralizing power. Scotland remained a separate kingdom, never united by dynastic accident in 1603. The Stuart claim to the throne, which in our reality arose only because Elizabeth I died childless, never mattered. The Tudors carried on through the 17th century, a dynasty far more like the Habsburgs, sprawling, interconnected, and staunchly Catholic. By the 1700s, England might have looked more like Spain or Austria, a conservative Catholic minority tied into continental alliances, slower to industrialize, less inclined toward global empire building. Without the Protestant identity that fueled both the Elizabethan nationalism and later imperial ambition, Britain never rose as the workshop of the world. The Americas, India, and the seas belonged more firmly to Spain, Portugal, and France. And all of this stemmed from one child, Henry, Duke of Cornwall, the boy who lived. So, what do you think would have been different had Henry, Duke of Cornwall lived? And what do you think about this idea of looking at alternate histories? What other events do you think are so seismic that had they gone just a little bit differently, all of English history would have changed? Leave me a comment and let me know. Maybe we can tackle that in a future alternative history. All right, my friend, thanks for sticking with me on this little experiment that we did. Let me know what you thought about it. And if you want to learn more about what actually happened to Henry, Duke of Cornwall, there's a link on the screen about that. All right, my friend, thanks for being here. Have an amazing day. I will be back tomorrow. Bye-bye.